In North Carolina versus Smathers, the North Carolina Court of Appeals took up whether the community caretaking exception applies in North Carolina when law enforcement stops a motor vehicle without reasonable suspicion or probable cause that a crime has occurred. Other jurisdictions have recognized that this exception exists, but North Carolina had only used this exception to allow law enforcement to impound disabled or abandoned vehicles on the roadway. In North Carolina versus Smathers, a deputy with the Transylvania County Sheriff's Department was traveling down a roadway at about 10 o'clock at night. He noticed that a car in front of him, a red Corvette, was traveling lawfully and within the speed limit. Suddenly, he noticed a large animal run out into the roadway, and he saw the red Corvette hit the animal, but continue to drive. The vehicle did slow down to about 35 miles per hour. When it hit the animal, the Corvette bounced up and came back down, creating sparks on the roadway. Seeing this, and knowing that Corvettes are typically made of fiberglass, the officer was concerned about the condition of the vehicle. The officer pulled in behind the Corvette and turned on his blue lights. The Corvette traveled a distance and then eventually pulled over. Once the deputy approached the vehicle, he realized that the driver was impaired and arrested her for DWI. The question that the court took up in this case was whether, if the officer did not have reasonable suspicion or probable cause to stop the car, which in this case the state conceded he did not, could he still pull the car over because he was concerned for the safety of the driver? This meant that the court had to analyze whether the community caretaking exception extended to stopping motor vehicles, and the court said that it does. If law enforcement officers have a reasonable need because of safety concerns to stop a motor vehicle, they can do so. The court recognized that officers need flexibility when they determine that there may be a risk to the public or to a driver or the occupants of a vehicle. The court created a test to determine whether the community caretaking doctrine applies in a particular case. The three-part test for the community caretaking doctrine as applied by the court is, number one, that a seizure or search under the Fourth Amendment has been conducted. Number two, that there was a reasonable need for community caretaking in this situation. And number three, if so, did that need outweigh the intrusion into the individual's privacy? In this case, the court ruled that this stop was justified. The officer was able to talk about why he was concerned for the driver, considering what he saw. To determine whether there's a reasonable need, the court will look at factors like how exigent were the circumstances, how much authority and force did the officer display, was there an automobile involved, was there an alternative way to address the concern that would have been effective. In this case, the court considered the fact that this collision occurred at nighttime and that this collision could have resulted in major damage to the car. Because of those things and the totality of the circumstances, the court ruled that this stop was justified. The court in this case spoke only of vehicle stops. It did not address whether this would apply to, say, entering a building or some other type of structure if there was a safety concern. Additionally, the court did not go into how much of a threat must exist or how much of an emergency must be going on in order for this to apply. Officers should consider the totality of the circumstances when deciding whether they can stop someone based on the community caretaking doctrine. The court did recognize that the subjective ideas of an officer do not come into play. In other words, just because an officer may also be thinking that there is another criminal purpose for someone's behavior does not matter as long as there is a true, reasonable safety concern or need. North Carolina versus Smathers does not change law enforcement's requirement to have reasonable suspicion under the Fourth Amendment when stopping motor vehicles. But it does allow law enforcement to have more flexibility to stop motor vehicles when they believe there is a legitimate safety concern to the public or to the driver and their passengers.